Gather round, let the stories unfold from the pages of old where the brave hearts are told. Women of wisdom, fire in their eyes, rising up high, ready to claim the skies. We're shining bright like a beacon of grace, echoes of faith in this timeless space. From Esther to Mary, the strength we embrace. 21st century woman, let's run this race.
Hello, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are streaming from today. Welcome to another episode of Women for Global Impact, Women of the Bible. I am so excited to be with you this afternoon, this morning, or this evening, depending on where you are streaming from. I am trying to get this to go to my page. So just give me a moment while I share it. I may have to turn it down a little bit and just ask my audience to join me live now. So I hope all is well. Thank you for those of you that are always on. I appreciate you. And so as you come on in the room, I'm going to ask that you will just drop your name in the chat so that I can give you a personal greeting. For those of you that might be watching the show for the first time, don't know who I am, I'm Elder Joan T Randall. I own a publishing business where we help people write and publish their best-selling books for impact and influence, and then use those books to create multiple streams of income and businesses. And I'm also the elder for I Believe God Ministry International and the director of their women's ministry. I'm excited to be here with you today. I love doing Women for Global Impact and talking about women of the Bible. And today we're going to do a 3-for-1. Right. That's what I'm calling it, a 3-for-1. You know, there are certain mentions of women in the Bible. Good afternoon, International Intercessor. I love to see you on when I come live. So thank you for joining. So there are certain women in the Bible that are mentioned, but they're mentioned in groups, right? Like they're mentioned together, like Jethro's daughters. When I did the study on Jethro's daughter, there were like 6 of them or 5 of them outside of the daughter that was married to Moses. So when I was doing the balance of Jethro's daughter, I think he had 7 daughters. So I think when I did the 6, because they talk about them in just one fell swoop, right? I had to do them together as 6 daughters, right? And then Moses's wife, I did as a separate study. So today it is something similar. Today I'm going to talk about 3 women who you may have not even thought about or heard about or even were familiar, because the way they were mentioned in the Bible, it's kind of jumping from chapter to chapter and could be a little confusing if you go from one scripture to the other to read it. Hey, Sister Elizabeth, so nice to see you. So today I have the pleasure of talking about Esau's wives, W-I-V-E-S, Esau's wives. So you have to really follow along and pay attention, because it could be a little bit confusing. And even when I was studying it, I had to keep going back to understand. Well, they called her this way in chapter 26, and then they called her another name in chapter 28 and another name in chapter whatever, right? So, hi, Elder. Nice to see you. I'm so happy you are here. You are going to appreciate this one, Elder, today. So let's get into it. Now, you all know who Esau was, right? Esau was Jacob's brother, his twin brother, right? And you know the story about Jacob and Esau, and that Jacob stole Esau's birthright, and then for a plate of food and the whole 9 yards. But it really was his mother that helped him come up with the con to con his brother out of the birthright. But when you look at it, when it all came out, it was exactly how it was supposed to be. It was exactly as how God had wanted it, right? And when you start to look at the study that I'm going to take you through, you realize that, hey, now I understand why. I'm sorry about that, guys. Now I understand why it had to be Jacob, right? It had to be Jacob as the chosen one, right? So anyway, let us talk about Esau's wife, right? One of the things we found out about Esau also was that he was born with like red hair, right? Red hair. And so when I think about it, I picture Esau as like a redheaded person. I think they call them ginger, right? So that's what I envision when I hear about Esau's physical features, right? And so you can find the story about Esau's wives in Genesis 28, Genesis 26, Genesis 28, and Genesis 36. They are not depth. Hey, Sister Judy, they're not in depth as if you're going to read a whole thing about the wives, but they are mentioned in these 3 chapters in Genesis. Genesis 26 was when we were first introduced to the names of his wives. And then in Genesis 28, it mentioned one wife. And then in Genesis 36, it mentioned all 3 of them. The thing is, when you read Genesis chapter 26, and you go to chapter 36, the names of the wives are different. And so I wanted to break it down to you, right? So you understand all 3 of the wives, what their names were, how many children they had for him, and what were they associated with. All right. So let's get into this. I love this stuff, having to dig and, go through all the stuff to come and bring this study to you, for you to have a little bit more knowledge of women in the Bible. At first, I told you there's 170 women mentioned in the Bible. I have covered about 120 women at this point, right? So now I'm going into the weeds to get these other women that we really haven't even talked about. All right. So let's talk about it. Esau got married when he was 40 years old, right? He was 40 years old when he got married. If you go to Genesis chapter 26, I think it's the last verse in Genesis chapter 26, it said that he married Judith. Hear me, right? You got to follow along. He married Judith, the daughter of Beri the Hittite, right? So that goes to show that he did not marry a woman that was an Israelite. He went outside of the normal expectation of the Israelite in terms of a marriage. So he married Judith, daughter of Beri the Hittite. Then it says he also married Basemath, the daughter of Elon the Hittite. So in Genesis chapter 26, those were the 2 women they named that Esau married, and they were both Canaanite women. Judith, daughter of Beri the Hittite, and Basemath, daughter of Helon the Hittite, right? Now then we go to chapter 28, and we found out that he now married Mahalath, daughter of Ishmael, right? So this was his 3rd wife, but her name was Mahalath, daughter of Ishmael, who was his cousin. Because remember, right, that Ishmael was Abraham's eldest son, right? And Esau is is Esau is Isaac's son. So that makes his third wife his cousin. Now, when we get to chapter 36, it named all three wives, but switches the names around. So in chapter 36, it tells you that he married Ada, daughter of Elon the Hittite, and Holibama, daughter of Anah the Hivite. Completely different names from what was mentioned in chapter 26, but left out the third wife that was mentioned in chapter 28. So now it had me going all around the world to try to figure it out. Now, what I found out and what I realized that back in those days, when they name children, sometimes children are named from places, right? Like Mary Magdalene, she was from Magdala, right? And so, or Magdalene. And so her name was a representation of where she was. She was Mary, but they call her Mary Magdalene because she was from Magdalene. See what I'm saying? So sometimes names are given based on the area or the city or the town or the province that you are from. And so now I had to go search because the names in chapter 26 were different from the names in chapter 36. And this is what I was able to summarize. The two Canaanite wives, the one that I told you was Judith in chapter 26 and Basemath in also chapter 26. Their names were changed or they were otherwise known as, you know what I mean? Like back in the days, like if you go to where I'm from or where I was raised in Jamaica, you will never hear anybody call me Joan, right? It's strange to them. Like where I was raised, where I grew up, where I went to high school, most people call me Pet, P-E-T, because that was the name affectionately given to me by my grandfather. And so my parents called me Pet. My grandparents called me Pet. My nieces and nephew, my friends, sisters, my brother, they all call me Pet. My nieces and nephew calls me Auntie Pet, right? So it's Joan, otherwise known as Pet, right? And so that is what I want to like bring to you to show you how the names interchange as you read the scripture, as you read the book of Genesis. So in 26, it talks about the wife named Judith. Her name in chapter 36 was Aholibama. It's the same person, but it's otherwise known as. So it's one in the same person. So where you see Judith in chapter 26, let me tell you, Aholibama was her name in chapter 36. It is the same person. She was the daughter of Beri the Hittite, right? Then Basemath, that was in chapter 26. When you go to chapter 36, they call her Ada, A-D-A-H, the same woman, right? So Ada was the daughter of Elon the Hittite, and she was Esau's other Canaanite wife, right? And we're going to talk about a little further the meaning of their names, right? Especially the Canaanite women. And so when you look in chapter 28, because it's not mentioned the third wife in chapter 36, but in chapter 28, they talk about Mahalath, Mahalath, which, by the way, is also that woman who was an Israelite, was also known as Basemath, the same name. So there were two of his wives. One was a Canaanite woman, one was a Hebrew woman with the same exact name. And so it was flipped in one of the scriptures just to differentiate that one was a Hebrew woman, one was a Canaanite woman. So the Hebrew name for Basemath was Mahalath. Man, let me tell you. So his three wives were Judith, Basemath, and Mahalath. That were Esau's three wives. Now, let us talk a little bit about what the name means, right? So, and then I'll tell you why he married the third one, because the two first wives were Canaanite women. They were outside of the Jewish tradition. They were outside of the Israelite, regime and all the things. And the parents did not like that at all. So when you talk about Basemath Hara, which is one of the wives from Canaan, right? Her name means harlotry. Like, yeah, it's actually, let me get the right thing. Let me get you the right thing before I go ahead of myself, right? Judith, the first wife. Let's talk about the first wife. Judith, aka Halobama, meant tent of high place. That's what her names mean, tent of high place. And some scholars say that she was given this name because she built places for idolatry, right? She built places for idolatry. So that's why I'm sharing with you, sometimes the names carry meaning of the things they do, the place they're from, or what they are known for, right? So the name Judith, the person, Aholibama, was the same person, and her name means tent of high places. And according to the scholars, what she did was built places for idolatry, right? The second wife, that was called Ada, which was also known as Basemath, was the name Basemath means perfumed, and the name Hada means adornment. According to scholars, she was into idolatry and harlotry because of the perfumery business and the adornment business that she was in. Again, her name was associated with the things that she did. Now, the third wife, which was the Hebrew woman, her name, Mahalath, means weary, weak, or to afflict. Isn't it crazy how sometimes the Hebrew women have names that are kind of like mousy, right? But her name means weary, weak, or to afflict. But she is the Basemath that was Hebrew. If you are getting this as I'm sharing, elder or intercessor, drop something in the chat to let me know that you are getting it. Or Sister Judy, hey, Sister Lisa, let me know that you're following along with this revelation of Esau's wives. All right. You also are aware that Esau's descendants were called Edoms, Edoms. And if you read through the New Testament, the children of Israel were always fighting against the Edomites. There was this huge conflict. The brothers' generation, the brothers, Jacob and Esau's family, were always at odds. First of all, they were at odds from they were in the womb. They came out at odds. They were at odds when Jacob stole the birthright. They were at odds when they had their family together. They had to separate because they had grown so large in terms of their ownership of land and livestock and everything and family. And so they had to separate, right? So there was this separation from inception, right? There was this duality that Rebecca carried in her womb, right? The whole time. And even as they grew up and become young men and men, it was the same kind of duality, the same kind of separation, the same kind of conflict that they experienced all throughout their life. All right. So, all right. Sister Judy said, yes, I get it. Sister Pat, International Intercessor, said yes. All right, let's talk about why there was so much conflict between these two wives. So he first married, right, Judith and Ada. right? Those are the two wives. But they were a torn in the side of his parents. The Bible tells us that. So if you go back to like Genesis 26, the last verse in Genesis 26, it tells you that they were a source of grief to Isaac and Rebekah. First of all, it's their son, their firstborn son, right? And he chose to go outside of the norm, outside of tradition, outside of their beliefs, and marry women from the Hivite and the Hittite, right? Which was completely opposite and against all the things that the Hebrews and the Israelites believed in. Because first of all, they worshipped false gods, right? It was based on idolatry. Their whole belief system there was based on idolatry. And Isaac and Rebekah, that was not what they wanted their son to choose. None of their sons, right? And so the Bible told us that the Canaanite women were a source of grief to Isaac and Rebekah. And then here is the flip, right? In chapter 28, Esau found out that Esau found out that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent Jacob into a land called Padam Aram, right? To go find a wife there. And he commanded Jacob to not marry a Canaanite woman. And so the blessing, when Isaac sent Jacob to go to Padam Aram to find a wife, he blessed him. But a part of the blessing had a command that said to Jacob, do not marry a Canaanite woman. Esau found out about that. Esau found out that his father directed his brother to go to this place to find a Hebrew woman, to find an Israelite wife, and commanded him not to marry a Canaanite woman. And so that was Esau's motivation to go find his third wife. And so Esau went and found his cousin, right? And married his cousin Mahalath, which was actually Ishmael's daughter. And that's how he had his third wife. And according to my reading of the Bible between Genesis 26 through to Genesis 36, right? He did that hoping that it would please his parents or to appease his parents, because he knew how they felt about all of the pain and grief that his Canaanite wives had caused them. And so he made a decision to marry his cousin, and take her as his third wife. Now, Judith, right, one of the wives from the Canaanite woman, bore him three sons. And the names of her sons were Jeush, Jalam. I'm sorry, not three sons, two sons and a daughter. So he had Jeush, Jalam, and Korah, who was the daughter. Basemath, which is Ada, right? Ada, the one what means adornment and perfume. She had one son called Eliphaz. And then Mahela, which was the Hebrew woman, bore him one son called Reuel. So in all, he had 5 children between all 3 wives: Jeush, Jalam, Korah, Eliphaz, and Reuel. That was his children with his 3 wives. The most amazing thing about the story and these women and this wife, just goes back to show the defiance that Esau had, right? Whether it was jealousy, whether he felt like his birthright was stolen, but there was always this defiance where he was concerned. And so again, as I said before, the descendants of Esau were called the Edoms, and they formed, get this guys, they formed their own distinct nation outside of the Israelites, outside of the tribes of Israel. They formed their own distinct nation and walked completely away from their shared ancestry to their father Isaac and to his grandfather Abraham, right? So again, separate completely his tribe from what he was born and raised in. And again, although they were related to the Israelites, they were separate in their beliefs. Isn't that incredible, right? That you have twins, right? Twins. And they were so completely, identically different. I'm sure they were fraternal twins, because first of all, they looked different when they were born. One was red, one was regular, right? So they were completely different in their beliefs. They were completely different in how they behaved. They were completely different in all the things. But when you look at what God expected, the prophecy, right? The promise that God made to Abraham had to come through the seed of Jacob. The 12 tribes of Israel came through him, right? So I hope that you got something out of this. This was Judith, this was Ada, and this was Mahalath. And those were the wives of Esau. And because there was not a lot of context or text around them, I had to do them all together, right? So I hope you walked away with something new, with something different. They had alternate names. They were known as, their names were AKAs, otherwise known as. So if you are reading a text and you see Aholibamah, that was Judith. If you see Basemath, that was Ada. And if you see Mahalath, she was also called Basemath, but she was Hebrew. All right, that's all I have today on these three women of the Bible, women for global impact. And listen, although the two, right, that were Canaanites, their tribe, my goodness, in Genesis, I think it's 36, you can read about all of the grandchildren that Esau had as a result of his three wives. And today you can find those people, right, the descendants of Esau, in Rome and somewhere over there in Britain, but Rome mostly. All right. So that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Women for Global Impact, Women of the Bible, as we talked about Esau's three wives. God bless you. I look forward to seeing you next week. And until then, may God bless you and keep you. Bye, guys.
Deborah's courage, Rahab's bold heart, lessons of love, each a crucial part. Together we stand, hand in hand we rise. With faith like a river, we'll chart the skies. We're shining bright, like a beacon of grace. Echoes of faith in this timeless space. From Esther to Mary, the strength we embrace. 21st century woman, let's run this race.